Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast. I'm Nick Harper from Washington, D.C., and these are the top headlines of the hour. A Ukrainian military plane with 14 people aboard crashes about 20 kilometres south of Kyiv amid reports of several locations around the city coming under attack. Black smoke is seen rising over the Ukrainian Defence Ministry intelligence headquarters in central Kyiv, although the building appears to be intact.
For all his bombs and tanks and missiles, I don't believe that the Russian dictator will ever subdue the national feeling of the Ukrainians and their passionate belief that their country should be free.
UK PM Boris Johnson calls Russian President Putin a dictator and says Moscow has attacked a friendly country without any provocation.
This is a deliberate, cold-blooded and long-planned invasion.
NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg says NATO is imposing severe economic sanctions on Russia, but says it has no plans to send alliance troops to Ukraine. Belarus leader Alexander Lukashenko says that his military is not taking part in the Russian invasion of Ukraine, as Kyiv says Moscow's troops are entering the country from Belarusian territory. Well, after months of speculations, calculations, assessments and back-to-back diplomatic talks, Ukraine is under attack from land and sea. This is the biggest attack in Europe since the Cold War. Currently, several Ukrainian cities are under attack. It includes the capital Kyiv, Kharkiv, Kramatorsk, Mariupol, Odessa and many others. Explosions could be heard before dawn in the capital Kyiv, gunfire rattling out near the main airport as sirens blared across the city. According to the Ukraine presidency, 40 Ukrainian soldiers have so far been killed. 10 civilians have also been killed in the latest attacks. Black smoke was seen rising over the Ukrainian Defence Ministry intelligence headquarters in central Kyiv, although the building itself appears to be intact. Ukraine said that some of its military command centres have been hit by Russian missile strikes. Russia's defence ministry says it has neutralised Ukrainian military air bases and even its air defence systems. Ukraine claims it has downed 6 Russian planes. Meanwhile, Russian missiles rained down on the Ukrainian cities. Explosions could be heard in several parts of the country. On your screens are visuals from Mariupol, Kharkiv and Kyiv. It shows damaged vehicles, broken radar equipment and other equipment at Ukrainian military facilities. Fragments of damaged military equipment was also seen near playgrounds. There were long lines of traffic on a road leading out of the Ukrainian capital, hours after Russian troops launched their attack. In the nearby towns of Mangush and Berdyansk, people queued for cash and gasoline. Civilians from Mariupol were also seen packing bags, and at the Polish border, Ukrainians were seen fleeing the country.
At 5 o'clock, some colleague called me and say war started, and we with wife decide put all our things in the Lviv and come back here. Before that, we from Mariupol, and we together moved to Lviv yesterday, and today we're here.
In Kyiv, people hurried down the streets, glued to their phones or listening to the breaking news on live streams. Several sought refuge in the city's metro stations and shelters.
We're going to Cherkasy, to our family, to be together now in this not very safe time in Ukraine, but we will have a victory, I believe.
Ukraine reported columns of troops pouring across the borders into the eastern Chernihiv, Kharkiv and Luhansk regions. It also reported Russians landing by sea at the port cities of Odessa and Mariupol in the south. Surveillance camera footage released by the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine showed various military and armoured vehicles crossing the Crimea-Ukraine checkpoint. Associated Press reporter Joe Federman brings us the latest from the Ukrainian capital.
There have been explosions across Ukraine overnight as Russia begins the long-anticipated attack, one that much of the world has been waiting for over the past few days. Here in Kiev, in the capital, we heard a number of explosions off in the distance overnight that sort of jolted the city awake, and more recently, air raid sirens indicating that some of these attacks are getting closer. For the time being, if you look behind me, it feels like life is normal. There's people milling about, walking around, going about their daily business, traffic is flowing, and so forth. But overnight, the government did declare a state of emergency, and we can imagine that in the coming hours, there will be more instructions ordering people to take safety precautions and probably to stay at home. For the time being, condemnations from around the world, from the U.S., from NATO, an appeal from the United Nations to Russia to please stop. But coming out of Moscow, for now, only defiance. President Putin vowing to continue and vowing that there will be severe consequences if the world tries to stop him.
Well, our correspondent Giles Gibson is joining us live from Moscow. Giles, the invasion now very clearly underway. What's the latest that you're hearing from the Kremlin there?
Well, Nick, we've had an update in the last few hours from Dmitry Peskov, who is President Putin's official spokesperson, describing some of the aims here of this Russian offensive. He said the aim is the demilitarization of Ukraine. He also talked about the neutralization of military potential inside the country, and he was asked about the timing here, how long this is going to go on for, days, weeks, and he simply said, pretty vaguely to be honest, that the duration of this operation is defined by its effectiveness and its objectives. We are still hearing from Russian military officials here in Moscow this phrase that was first used by President Putin in that dawn address that he gave to the Russian nation, a special military operation. That gives the impression, doesn't it, of a targeted operation, some sort of limited operation in those two breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine. Of course, according to the reports that we're getting out of the country, that we're getting from the Ukrainian government, you have explosions in Kiev, in the capital, as we were just hearing. You have the Ukrainian government claiming that columns of troops are crossing the borders at all sorts of different locations. So clearly, as far as Ukraine and the West are concerned, this is not a special military operation. This is a full-scale invasion.
And Giles, how about the mood in Moscow at the moment? How are people in the Russian capital viewing what they're seeing taking place in Ukraine?
Well, it was certainly a surreal atmosphere to be here in Moscow, listening to that speech from President Putin in the early hours of the morning, talking about the denazification of Ukraine, a propaganda claim that has been put out again and again over the course of the last few days by the Russian president, talking about that special military operation, sending troops into eastern Ukraine. And as we were just describing, it seems to be a much, much broader reference. And at the same time here in Moscow, it felt pretty normal. You had people getting up.
Well, that was Giles Gibson joining us live from Moscow. Europe's worst nightmare has come true. One of its largest countries is under attack. The US president has rolled out the first batch of sanctions in what they say could be an ever fiercer and broader cascade of financial sanctions and penalties over Russia's moves against Ukraine. The Biden administration says that there are more sweeping penalties that could cripple Russia's ability to do business at home and abroad and likely bring on recession in the country. The president is expected to address the nation on the Ukraine situation later today from Washington. Within hours of Putin's address, leaders from the United States, Germany and the United Kingdom, along with others, criticised the Kremlin for the attack. The following are their remarks and statements.
This is a grave moment for the security of Europe. Russia's unjustified and unprovoked attack on Ukraine is putting countless innocent lives at risk. With air and missile attacks, ground forces and special forces from multiple directions, targeting military infrastructure and major urban centers. This is a deliberate, cold-blooded and long-planned invasion.
Today, in concert with our allies, we will agree a massive package of economic sanctions designed in time to hobble the Russian economy. And to that end, we must also collectively cease the dependence on Russian oil and gas that for too long has given Putin his grip on Western politics.
Putin is bringing suffering and destruction to his immediate neighbors. He is violating the sovereignty and borders of Ukraine and endangering the lives of countless people in Ukraine, Russia's brother nation. As a next step, in consultation with our partners in Europe and NATO, we will implement further tough sanctions.
Russian leadership will face unprecedented isolation. This is not a question of blocks. This is not a question of diplomatic power games. It's a matter of life and death. It's about the future of our global community.
Well, just hours before the announcement, US soldiers were seen landing in Latvia's capital city of Riga. The US Air Force plane landed on the tarmac. Latvian army soldiers were waiting near the plane to welcome the US soldiers as they arrived. Well, joining us now, we have Dr. Kari Oderman, who is a political commentator, joining us live from Germany. Doctor, this is obviously a huge moment for the new German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. How is what we're seeing unfolding in Ukraine being viewed from Germany's Chancellor?
Chancellor Scholz has made several statements already during the day. I think that the most important thing to note is that Nord Stream 2, the gas pipeline bringing Russian gas into the EU, bypassing Ukraine, has been put on hold as of yesterday. And today, with the advancements of Russian troops into Ukraine, the invasion and shelling of many major cities, it's an important sign that Germany did this beforehand. In the German media today, there has been an attempt, in my opinion, to put this into a framework of solidarity with Ukrainians. German politicians are challenged right now with the inflation and raising of gas rates and energy prices in general. And their constituents are now going to have to pick up the bill for some of their foreign policy mistakes. Of course, voters are going to say that coming to Ukraine's assistance at all is going to keep their prices up, where, as I mentioned, German politicians are trying to frame this as no one's going to freeze. And if energy gets more expensive, it's not that important because lives are being lost in Ukraine.
We've already seen sanctions from the European Union. Are you expecting that we could see over the coming days a stronger response from Germany itself?
No, I don't think that is in Germany's tradition. Germany is a country that, because of its unique history, is trying to build alliances. Because Ukraine is not in NATO, Article 5 of NATO will not be invoked. The European Union will most likely continue on with financial sanctions, but a military move from Germany alone won't happen. There is NATO Article 4, which many people aren't that aware of, which deals with several NATO countries joining together to make an offensive, and that's something that Poland and the Baltics are looking right now, but Germany does not have that on the table.
Dr. Oderman, thank you very much for your time today. That was Dr. Kari Oderman speaking to us live from Frankfurt in Germany. Reacting to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, European markets have plummeted in trading today. Major European markets, including France's CAC, Germany's DAX and the UK's FTSE, are all in deep red, plunging up to 5%. Global stocks and US bond yields dived while the dollar, gold and oil prices jumped as Russian forces attacked Ukraine. MOEX Group, which runs the Moscow Stock Exchange, suspended trading shortly after markets opened, and Russia's indices crashed up to 50%. The crash of European stocks followed the equities rout in Asia since the morning, with a sharp jump in commodity prices, adding to worries about inflation and risks of economic growth. Indian markets also closed today with heavy losses. India's Sensex registered its fourth worst fall ever, closing with a loss of 2,702 points, while Nifty 50 fell below the 16,300 mark. The United States and its allies are imposing severe economic sanctions on Russia in response to its aggression towards Ukraine. Meanwhile, oil prices surged today, with crude breaching $100 a barrel for the first time since 2014 and touching as high as $105 per barrel. Russia is the world's second largest oil producer, mainly selling its crude to European refineries, and is the largest supplier of natural gas to Europe, providing about 35% of the supply to the European bloc. In the commodities market, gold prices jumped, touching $1,950 per ounce, its highest level in more than a year. The deepening sell-off in equities came after US stocks already took a beating on Wednesday, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average down 1.38% and the S&P 500 losing 1.84%. The Russian ruble turned violently lower today as well, after posting small gains early in the session. Well, joining us next to give us more insight into Ukraine is Boris Volkov. He's joining us from Moscow, and he's an associate professor at the Institute of Asian and African Studies at Moscow's State University. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. This invasion is something that the West has been warning about for some time, that President Putin seems to have been gearing up towards for some time. What's your reaction to what you've seen unfolding in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, the events that took place these days should have, if you ask my personal opinion, they should have taken place 8 years ago, when it was already clear that the regime change in the Ukraine will not lead to any stable situation in that country. And the Nazis that took the upper hand in the establishment, they were always, pursuing the policies of aggression towards the people of Lugansk and Donetsk, which were at that time unrecognized. Now they are recognized and sovereign independent states, the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics. So and it led to more than 10,000 of life losses. Something should have been done actually a long time ago, but better late than never. And it was only natural that, Russia intervened, like India intervened in East Pakistan in 1971, to stop the genocide, to stop the atrocities, to save the people from total elimination and all kinds of sufferings. So I think that between all choices, there was no good choice, actually. There was only, bad, worse, and even worse choices. But this is not a very good choice. Of course, no one wants a war, but other choices would be even worse and worst.
Now, the West has obviously framed this as an unprovoked attack on Ukraine. Russia views it very differently. How do you feel that history will mark this moment, whether an unprovoked attack or something that was expected to take place and from a Russian point of view had to take place?
Well, if you don't call, constant shellings and bombings a provocation, then of course it was an unprovoked attack. But the bombings and shellings lasted for several days and especially nights, and people in Donetsk and Luhansk regions, now republics, were living in cellars and waking up late in the night, to the explosions all around them. And children were crying, and if it's not a provocation, well, then it's an unprovoked attack. As for history, well, of course, we'll see what history is a long story. But now we all see that this is a point of liberation. It's not a war. It's a liberation of Donetsk and Luhansk republics who want to be left alone, who want to live their lives, who want to speak their mother tongue, who don't want to cherish and to commemorate Nazi collaborationists as is done in some parts of Ukraine now. So I think this is going to be a turning point in history, and as I see it, it is going to be a beginning of a new road for the independent and sovereign states.
Professor Boris Volkov, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today. Well, that's all we've got time for this hour. Thank you for joining us. I'm Nick Harper in Washington, D.C. And, of course, stay tuned for more updates on the unfolding situation in Ukraine.
This is right, Arab.